Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。With the January 19 deadline for the US TikTok ban fast approaching, ordinary Americans have given the out-of-touch politicians in Washington a huge middle finger, downloading another Chinese app, Xiaohongshu, en masse, sending it to the #1 spot on the US App Store. American soft power has taken a massive hit. So, what is Xiaohongshu? Will it be banned next? And will the politicians on Capitol Hill come to regret biting off their nose to spite their face? Today I'm joined by special guest Professor Warwick Powell to discuss. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Boreham in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. For many in the US, Xiaohongshu, or Little Red Book, is the latest new Chinese app, and they're downloading it in massive numbers in preparation for a possible TikTok ban later this week. Yesterday, Xiaohongshu surged to the top spot on the US App Store, and Americans are now interacting directly with Chinese netizens and calling themselves TikTok refugees. But for Chinese netizens, Xiaohongshu is nothing new. The app was launched here in Shanghai back in 2013, and today it has a massive user base of 300 million. So here's some quick information. Xiaohongshu means Little Red Book in Chinese, but contrary to popular belief, that's not really a throwback to Chairman Mao's Little Red Book. Instead, it's an analogy, a place where users write notes about their travel plans, restaurant choices, shopping wish lists, and so on. Of the 300 million users, about 70% are women. Half were born after 1995, and 35% were born after the year 2000. Half of its users come from China's top Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, and it's described by its creators as youthful and vibrant, and a national lifestyle guide. Young Chinese who use the app will turn to it for recommendations when they go traveling, when they want to try a new restaurant, and to find out about the latest products on the market. But here's the main point. Unlike TikTok, Xiaohongshu is roughly 0% political in nature. People don't discuss news or politics there, and instead focus on shopping, the latest trends, and what's hot in Shanghai, Chengdu, and Shenzhen. There is not currently a US version of the app, so these so-called TikTok refugees from the US are currently interacting with Chinese users in the Chinese ecosystem. So I'm pretty sure that unless Xiaohongshu quickly capitalizes on this surge in North American users, those so-called TikTok refugees will soon get bored and will probably move on. Now I want to bring in today's special guest, Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute, Adjunct Professor Warwick Powell from the Queensland University of Technology. Professor, welcome back to the show. Now, firstly, I want to just zoom out a little bit and talk about the TikTok situation, which the US Supreme Court are currently considering before the deadline of January 19, which is later this week. Now, the move to ban TikTok in the US is related to national security concerns, but it's hard to take that claim seriously considering the vast amount of, frankly, quite hilarious things Washington has deemed national security threats over the past few years, many of which we've featured on this show. Now, I seem to remember Chinese coffee machines, Chinese port cranes, Chinese EVs, Chinese subway trains, Chinese fridges, Chinese students, and even Chinese garlic has been under US suspicion. What is going on here, and why is the US so paranoid about anything and everything that comes from China?
Well, the common theme across all of those, Andy, is that they're Chinese. And I think that the problem we've got in the United States at the moment is that its political culture has rediscovered McCarthyism and has basically tied itself into some serious knots around this question of national security. A lot of this national security question relates to America's sense of diminished significance in the world, a form of displacement anxiety, and it sees China as a peer competitor, and it will do anything and everything that it can to try to stop the rise of China and for China to, in the eyes of the Americans, overtake the Americans' position in the world. The obsessions around national security have become so extreme that they've securitized just about everything. And once you've done that, it literally means that everything is a national security question, but at the same time, nothing is. The only way that you can make sense of national security questions is if you've got a laser focus on what actually constitutes national security, actually what your risks are. And risks, you've got to look at it in two aspects. One is the probability that something, could be a threat genuinely. And of course, the extent to which it becomes a threat and what the consequences of that are. And you've got to take a holistic view and a comprehensive view. The Americans have, over the last few years, I think, reached a point where they're jumping at shadows, they're jumping at the things that they imagine themselves, the monsters that are obviously keeping them up at night. And they've reached a point where it's starting to look very, very silly.
Yeah, American users have downloaded another Chinese app, Xiaohongshu, en masse yesterday, sending it to the top of the US App Store. Now, this seems to me a bit like a hit to America's so-called soft power. And it really shows not only how out of touch the politicians on Capitol Hill are, but that ordinary Americans are also getting quite sick of the state of Silicon Valley and its offerings. What's your take?
Look, I think in a sense it's a large and growing group of ordinary Americans who are trolling the federal government and the politicians, which obviously has an irony towards all of it. The Xiaohongshu app is not a direct complementary app to TikTok, as many people obviously think. The most obvious complement is the Chinese version itself, Douyin. But it is an interesting reaction from the American public that they are rejecting the politicization of what has largely been an entertainment and news sharing app, and importantly, an app that many Americans have used to create small businesses around. So there's a lot of jobs that are going to be affected by the prospective ban of TikTok itself. And I think Americans actually understand what genuinely constitutes a risk, intuitively at least, and what things don't. And clearly they're starting to vote with their swipes on the phone and are looking to maintain their relationships with the Chinese world, because they simply don't buy into the threat rhetoric that comes out of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I love how you refer to it as a collective trolling of the folks on Capitol Hill. But if Xiaohongshu does remain popular in the US, and that's questionable, do you think the politicians on Capitol Hill would target it next?
Naturally. It's the natural response. This is a cat and mouse process now.
Okay, last question today, Professor. There's been some pushback from President-elect Donald Trump, and he's kind of pushing to hold off on the TikTok decision until he's in office. Now, of course, the TikTok deadline is January 19, and he won't be inaugurated until the next day. So what do you think the outcome of this TikTok case will be, and what does this whole debacle kind of tell us about the US today?
Well, what it tells us about the US is that it's reached a stage of high paranoia and also, in many regards, a diminished confidence in its own ability to govern and regulate its own technological environment. The idea that something like TikTok poses a, quote, security threat, unquote, really says something about regulators' views on the capabilities of American technology regulators to address these risks. If it was a manageable risk, and you'd think that the United States has sufficiently skilled and clever people in these areas, then you wouldn't need to ban something. But look, the United States has reached a point of high paranoia and, in fact, high farce in that regard. Donald Trump, to his credit, has been open to the possibilities of recognizing that the app is not what the Biden administration claims it to be. And time will tell, of course, as to whether or not it simply becomes part of a negotiation deck of cards that the incoming president will use as part of how he wants to re-engage with China. How this plays out, given the time gap between the 19th and his inauguration, I guess, will depend upon how the justices in the court come to a view as to when it is that they might reach their judgments and deliver their judgments. So, that's really in their hands, and perhaps some phone calls to the justices could lead them to require a few more days to think about what it is that they're going to ultimately conclude.
Very interesting. Professor Warwick Powell, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today.
Absolute pleasure to be with you again.
And on that note, that will be it for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so do let me know down below. Have you downloaded Xiaohongshu, and do you think TikTok will be banned in the US? Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.